I'll give a quick introduction for myself. Great to be here today. My name is Corey Lee. As I started earlier, I mentioned currently the Chief Zero Trust Security Architect for U.S. Education. So I cover all of our higher education customers and our K-12 customers. So I spend a lot of time flying around, putting a cape on, doing one of three things: meeting with Chief Information Security Officers with companies to build their security programs, or on the reactive side, you can see we are in kind of less than ideal circumstances because there's a security incident that's taking place, and there's a number of things that come along with that, to include helping us get back to a state of operation, and then also a strategic recovery. And lastly, I spend a decent amount of time helping with proactive conversations around cybersecurity. Right, so Zero Trust is an area I've been working in for roughly I would say about 7 to 8 years. Started in Microsoft about 12 years roughly, and got my start in the federal space, so I spent a lot of time supporting DoD and national security customers, moved from there to a lot of the commercial space, and then education space, supporting K-12 customers. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what we've been seeing in the landscape, and Zero Trust will be a focus of today's conversation. My objective here is to really democratize this conversation and bring it down to a level that makes sense. We're not going to talk about marketing fluff. We're not going to talk about what the industry kind of puts a spin on Zero Trust and makes it seem like it's a product. We're really going to get down to the brass tacks of this conversation. So I wanted to start here with about 2 years ago, we actually started looking at stats related to cybersecurity events focused on education. Previously, at Microsoft, we collect a lot of threat intelligence regarding devices that are being compromised, identities that are being targeted, emails, if you will, that are showing up and potentially malicious. And prior to about 2 years ago, there was a huge focus mostly around kind of that all aggregate of what we're seeing. But as we're starting to hear more information about cloud-specific or industry-specific concepts, things like Microsoft Cloud for healthcare, Microsoft Cloud for education, Microsoft Cloud for financial services, we're starting to get down to this industry context of information that we're collecting. And a few things jump out to me. When I came back into education about right before the pandemic started, things were fairly smooth, and there was a lot of proactive conversations. But we also saw the balance tipping with respect to what was noticed with respect to ransomware. There was a shift in what attackers started to do, and it became coined as advanced ransomware or human-operated ransomware. And what this essentially indicated was we shifted away from attackers just opportunistically dropping something in the environment and attempting to encrypt something and hoping that they get arrested. They got smarter. They realized that they could actually do certain things while in the environment, increase the likelihood that they could have a ransom payment get made. Call it ransom payment insurance, right? So come in, we encrypt specific stuff that we know that's super high value. Or come in and we steal data that we know is high value. And we do it before we actually encrypt it. These tactics led to not just an increase in the ransomware attacks, but an increase in the likelihood that customers would make ransom payments. And the cost went up drastically. What we saw as part of that, this increase of dollars that went into that space allowed these attackers to increase their tooling, improve, right? Get faster, get better. So in many cases, they would come into an environment and they would already have a good understanding of what was going on in the environment, in many cases more so than the folks that were managing the environment. They knew it better than the folks who were managing the environment. So the form of operational intelligence they had was extremely high. We also saw an increase in frequency in attacks per week. Beyond that, when it came down to the scope and the size of the ransom payments, not only did they realize they could raise the price, but they also realized that if they did certain things such as took student data from the environment or took medical patient records or health patient records, if it's a school that has an AMC or a medical center, that the likelihood that the payment could actually get paid would also go up. So very targeted, very intentional, was not by chance, and oftentimes when a school or a school district falls prey to this particular style of ransomware, we know that it's meant to cause maximum impact. right? That is the objective. We want the school to go down, and we specifically want to make sure that we can ensure that the payment is made. It's a financial gain, right? It's a dollars and cents conversation. It's not personal in many cases. It's, we know that there's opportunities that we can go and get those dollars. So I won't leave the rest of this, but I will point out the fact that there's still a lot of data being produced that's splitting out kind of K-12, higher ed, as well as just the types of attacks, the types of ransomware attacks. But the net here is we're seeing a change in attacker tactics, and this means we have to actually change the way we're securing our environments. Things are moving to the cloud, things are moving outside of the environment, outside of traditional networks. We're also seeing an explosion of things like IoT devices being used, at which point we're now even seeing more common ransomware attacks that fall under the context of distributed denial of service as a ransomware attack, meaning they're not actually encrypting anything. They're just flooding the network and the appliances in the environment to bring down the services and then issue a ransom payment, right? So as we're starting to see these scenarios become more prominent, we know that we have to change the game, right? So if we can shift to the next slide here. So, just some things that we're seeing as advanced threats and common threats, if you will, that are, some have always been around and some are starting to increase in frequency. One of which we talked about phishing earlier, right? Email security hygiene, one of the top entry points and vectors for attack, right? When we think about a traditional ransomware attack, it's not just one activity or an event. Generally, it follows a flow, and that flow looks something like, if we can get a user to click on an email that has something malicious in it, that leads to something landing on a device. Some type of malicious payload, call it malware, call it something else, right? At which point, that then leads to a number of other activities like looking for highly privileged accounts in the environment, getting access to a highly privileged account, and then having the permission to go and launch something like an encryption payload for encrypting up infrastructure in the environment, right? There's a series of steps that take place. Now, with that, this is important because we still see the same stats for phishing being a top entry point that we've seen almost for the last 10, 15 years, right? It hasn't changed. So what does this mean? We need to increase and improve baseline email hygiene. If we're starting at zero, some of what we talked about, there's kind of a crawl, walk, run state, right? We need to get to basic email filtering, let's get to standard email filtering, let's get to advanced email filtering, and there's a give and take with respect to not impacting the user experience. Conversation hacking, I won't go into a lot there, but we've seen the influx of things like Zoom bombing, using information and share via IMs to once also launch things in the environment. So historically, we look at email, but now as we talk about instant messaging and chat, now we have a new vector potentially into the environment. Thirdly, malware. Interesting enough, when we look at a lot of the ransomware scenarios, oftentimes it's a piece of benign malware in the environment, something that isn't malicious today, that was scanned by an attacker using scanning technology, and they weaponize that existing malware in the environment. So it could have been something there for 5 years, right? It never did anything. It never looked like it was bad. People just kind of ignored it or what have you. But at some point, it got activated and it got turned into something that was malicious, and it was used to actually carry out all the work in the environment. So, when we think about something like this, talk about vulnerability management, threat management, obviously there's prioritization and stuff, but now this is increasing the focus of insider risk, right? What is already in the environment that could potentially do things that are bad, not just focusing on what's coming through the front door. IoT misuse goes without saying in some cases, but we saw a lot of schools during COVID, right? Lining up camera systems, lining up hybrid workspaces, hybrid school spaces, right? This meant intelligent cameras connected to the internet, printers connected to the internet, if not already, and lots of things that are quote unquote a different device type now actually on the internet. What does that mean? Things that are on the internet that happen to have vulnerabilities potentially can be found if we're not thinking about protecting, right? Scan the environment, find those bad things that they happen to have a vulnerability, now go and exploit, right? It's very easy to do. We can talk about that, but there's websites that literally you go to it and you drop in an IP address and it'll tell you all the things that that organization has on the internet that they can exploit, right? It's very simple. DNS, we won't go into that, but more sophisticated someone attack will just poisoning DNS within the environment, looking to take advantage of how you do resolution, which is an example. If someone's trying to go to www.microsoft.com, that URL is kind of a DNS record. On the back end, it's an IP address. So being able to look at that record and do some poisoning or spoof that IP address, get a user to go to a fake version of your website, provide their credential, and then now they have access to that credential. Hopefully it's not an admin account, right? Because now that admin account can easily be used to do stuff and they don't even have to do any work. Right? These last two, man in the middle, we are starting to see things like man in the middle attacks that evade MFA as an example, right? And this is a more sophisticated one, but an example is we have MFA turned on, user potentially gets clicks on a link to go to a website, it redirects them to a login page where there's a proxy in the middle. Right, looking at all the things that they're doing once they got to that website. So they got to the real website that they were trying to go to, but there's a session that's tracking what they're doing. They provide their credential, and now due to things like MFA fatigue, where users just click yes, it wasn't even them, they never logged in, but they're like, my organization forces me to MFA, so I got a push notification, just click yes. Right, those things leading to bad behavior and creating some of these attacks. And SQL injection, once again, it's not new. But as we are starting to see more managed databases popping up and being online on the internet because of the nature, now if we're not looking at how we're protecting that core infrastructure from attacks that could be web-based or things that have traditionally been possible like SQL injection, now we're just seeing an evolution in how these things are targeted. So some things are new, some things are not, but the reality is we have to be looking at the spectrum of the threats that are potentially targeting the things that an institution or a school is doing to transform business, right? So if we go to the next slide, here's where let's talk about some of the things where security is going, right? So we have emerging threats, we have things that are popping up. In the world today, we know that there's a changing landscape regarding who we collaborate with, right? We'll talk about some of this in the research stuff. Secure collaboration across universities for secure research, huge area. But we also know that in every school we have affiliates, we have adjunct faculty, we have folks that have come in as contractors, we have partnerships, supply chain risk, all these things relate to what we do as an institution and the core business model. Now with those things, there are some trends that are kind of following some of this stuff. So the introduction of hybrid cloud, right? Folks are extending their data centers to the cloud or going completely to the cloud. Folks are also adopting IoT. We've also seen, I think someone mentioned the metaverse earlier, where now data is shifting into SaaS applications and other spheres of digital technology where we have to be able to track it. And this is relating to data security challenges that are now becoming a lot more challenging, right? So when we think about some of, you build out a little bit here, Microsoft recently announced, we'll call it about a year and a half, 2 years ago, that given the things that we're seeing, we have to up the ante. And what this means is we have to increase the funding associated with building out modern security technology to address not just the stuff that's happening and changing within things we've seen before, but also going to the future, right? Where things are going. And this means, won't belabor this point, but Microsoft naming and technologies have changed over time as we get into the cloud security realm. This is where, whether we're running AWS, Azure, GCP, or private cloud in the environment, how are we protecting the cloud environment that isn't just necessarily always secure by default? There are things that you are responsible for in the context of the shared responsibility model that we need to make sure are accountable. Because we don't want you to be the weakness link, right? So cloud security becoming an increasing focus. And we've been seeing some of these things evolve and change, also with the introduction of things like cloud monitoring, right? And just improved monitoring. We found that a number of institutions, schools, other entities still to this day don't have a security incident management platform. Something that can see across the environment and look at all of the threats that are potentially attacking that environment, not just one specific security domain, but the entire digital estate. Now, part of that is because of the barrier to entry with that technology. I saw a lot of customers that they didn't even think that cloud solutions produce bombs, right? At which point, if we come in for an incident response, we say, all right, the attack moved from on-prem to cloud assets potentially were compromised, let's figure out what happened. With no logs available, that means we can't actually get to a point where we can say what was the point of entry potentially, or what was the scope of the day?
Source IP address.
Right? Any of that stuff. So as we're seeing the increase in focus of several things, cloud is creating an extension of our environment. As our environments explode and do more, digitally transform, we now have to be thinking about what is the arc of visibility that we have over the more things that we are doing and the posture of those things. So I'll jump past some of those other things and we'll keep it moving. So yeah, we're investing a lot of money there, and everything from decentralized identity and insider risk management, very big areas of focus. And that leads me into this kind of next piece of the conversation, which is with digital transformation comes this conversation of security modernization, right? As we transform digitally, we have to transform and modernize our security. Now, you'll hear this term zero trust out in the industry. That in many cases, gets looked at as a buzzword, it gets looked at as a product, there's so many definitions for it, but I'm kind of going to provide a one-liner here in terms of the reality. Zero trust in its truest form is intelligent risk-based security. That's what it is, right? It's not a product, it's not a technology. Now, you may ask me, well, Corey, why is it intelligent risk-based security? It's because, technically speaking, we know that in today's landscape, it can be very broad. You have a lot of scenarios, you have a lot of use cases. But the objective here is we need to then put that break in the context of a security incident. If you've heard this term cyber resilience, what this means is if you have a security incident, yes, we can have an incident, but we don't want the school to shut down. Right? We don't want it to get to critical state where now the worst case scenario is present, right? Because we know we're not going to have a silver bullet for security anytime soon. But as we're going through this conversation, there's different stages in this journey. So if you've ever heard someone say zero trust is a journey, right? Oftentimes it starts with a mindset shift with 3 core principles. 1, we have to be able to assume breach. That means we assume that something may be in the environment that we never detected, that we never knew was there, and it could be doing something that's nefarious. By doing that, this means we focus on the worst case scenario, right? Resilience, right? Preventing the worst case scenario, risk-based security. If it's the worst scenario, we should be working back from the worst scenario. So the mindset kind of starts that journey. Then we move into a strategy conversation. How exactly do we attack the environment based on how it's designed? Right? What are some of the core assets that exist in the environment? What are the data types that we process? Right? There's a strategy here because we want to focus on high risk. We don't just want to throw security controls and technologies at stuff, right? We want to throw it at the things that matter because our goal is to prevent the highest risk, right? As we move through that, there's a number of frameworks that exist, right? So Gartner came out with, what's referred to as ZTNA, Zero Trust Network Access. Forrester came out with what's referred to as Zero Trust. Right? And you have these industry outlets that will come out with kind of a spin of the conversation to kind of illustrate what it's meant to focus on. But the net is when we move on the technology conversation, we're talking about risk-based security that's intelligent. We're focusing intelligently on the things that we want to secure that have the highest risk and making sure that we pay with those, right? So as we continue to go through this, those core principles I talked about, one of which being assumed breach, another is being explicit verification. Meaning we don't just implicitly trust things because it's on the network. Historically, it's been this scenario where we'd say, oh, because we have some firewall rules at the edge, thing has come in, and we're good. Once you're in, you get full access. And then came supply chain risk. What happens if something is in the environment that you authorize to be there, and it starts doing something very bad that you never intended? Take SolarWinds as an example. Right? How do you protect against something that you authorized and you allowed to be in the environment, but you didn't think that it needed to be revalidated or monitored or reassessed, right? So now we're moving away from not just implicitly accepting things, hence why we'll talk about how zero trust is moving to explicit trust, not implicit trust, which is kind of applied. It's a shift, right? It's a mental shift, and it's important. The last piece here, so assume breach, explicit verification. And as we start to talk about least privilege, right, this is kind of the last layer here. And this is backed by continuous monitoring. So I'll go into an example of this, but kind of where we've come from in terms of how do we get here. It's a question that comes up all the time. We would use primarily just network telemetry to say whether something was trustworthy or not, or whether something was okay or not. This meant in most cases we do the basic thing. You're inside of the corporate IP range, we allow you into the network, somewhat potentially static, and then when we allow you, we almost kind of allow everything, right? You get in, we allow stuff, you're on the network. Where we're going is increasing the request context allows us to actually be adaptive and dynamic around how we grant access to stuff, but also how we monitor access over time. So if we granted access before and something changed, meaning the health of what an application was doing or the health of what an identity was doing changed, went from good to bad, we now feel like there's a reason we should remove access, or there's a reason we should minimize or mitigate the impact associated with that entry or the activity that's happening. So by being able to assess more context, like what user is logging in, how are they logging in, where are they logging in from, what is the strength of the authentication that they're using to log in, can now be used as context to make some decisions. In the device lane, what device is the user coming from? Are they coming from a BYD device? Are they coming from a managed device? Is that device healthy or is it unhealthy? Why? Because we can see the context around what's happening on the device. At the application layer, are we using applications that have accreditations and certifications that have elapsed, meaning they're no longer valid? Are we seeing applications that have certificates that have expired? Are we seeing applications where they're actually showing behavior in the environment that is inconsistent with what the application normally does? Right? And as we roll throughout this network telemetry, right? Once again, are we on the network, off the network? Are we seeing it in one specific network, going back to isolation, right? As we isolate things, we kind of know what's there. And we roll out through that, and what we ultimately end up wanting to answer the question for is the thing known? Do we trust it? And should it be allowed? And when we allow it, what is the type of access we should allow? Instead of allowing full access, maybe we're going to allow limited access. Why? Because Cummins' context told us that we should actually only allow them to access certain types of data, or only allow them to access certain stuff if they're coming from their main device, or only allow them to access certain stuff if they're coming from the corporate network, right? We're using all of this in context and we're making decisions, at which point, this is kind of the North Star that we want to get to. So conceptually, kind of training your mind to think, here's how I get to intelligent risk-based security. It's not just one size fits all for everything. We absolutely want to look at risk and we want to change how access is permitted based on that risk. So we move to the next slide. So NIST produced, as part of a partnership, Zero Trust Architecture document, NIST 800-207. So feel free to check that out if you want. But starting to bring together, okay, as we're talking about how to make this real, make this happen, we now need to be able to take some core components that aren't foreign to the environment and bring them together to be able to make this make sense. So in this middle, the key piece of this I'm call out is that this whole notion of making decisions is tied to what's referred to as policy enforcement points or policy decision points. These policies are taking into account context coming from things like identity, devices, network, applications, and now it's making decisions to keep security guardrails in place to allow adaptive access to be provisioned and provided. Right. So, I won't go into a lot of these, but everything, these terms kind of mean things in the federal world. CDM, continuous diagnostics and monitoring, meaning we don't just monitor stuff when it first happens, we monitor it continuously over time. And other things like intelligence, data, how do we get more insightful, right? We have technology that can see things that could never be seen before. And now it can also allow us to make decisions off of things that have never been seen before. So this threat intelligence conversation, very huge, very important. But the net is we want to get to a point where we have these policy decision points and enforcement points in the environment to help us take this context and then make risk-based decisions in the environment. Next slide. So oftentimes we get a question of, what happens if we're starting at square one? Or what happens if, we really need to understand where we're going, how to get there. And we'll just go ahead and build it out. Okay. In many cases, the journey looks very different for every customer. And I say that because you can start at a certain point where you're very strong in the device lane, but maybe very not strong in the identity lane, or very strong in the network lane and not strong in the application lane. So there's some give and take here. But the net is each one of these stages tends to represent kind of a moderate security journey that indicates we are moving towards zero trust outcomes. One being identity and access management. We can't jump across it. We can't ignore it. We can't. I know in a lot of environments it's complicated. It's the one thing no one wants to talk about. And the moment it doesn't work, users are frustrated because the user experience sucks, right? But when it's working well, no one cares about it because it's actually working well. And that's the whole intent. That's the purpose, right? But as we start to look at how we're handling identities, affiliates, non-affiliates, adjunct faculty, FTE staff, external users, external collaborators, right? There are profiles for these personas that allow us to do context-based access control and take those decisions and apply them to different persona types, which is super important because something that you do for an admin, right, may not be the exact same thing that you do for an adjunct faculty. Something you do for a staff member, who's working, if you're in K-12, they're running a cafeteria, you're a bus driver, if you're in higher ed, it could be someone who's just orchestrating, campus activities, things of that nature, but they potentially access different things, they require different stuff, and more importantly, come with a different security profile, meaning the risk associated with that thing or user, right, is likely different than in other scenarios. So as we move through this journey, we're enhancing stuff over time. The one piece I want to call out that's starting to become extremely important is the incorporation of insider risk management. Lots of environments have not quite gotten to the point where the insider risk management conversation has made it to an emphasis point. And what I mean by that, when we're talking about zero trust and resilience, is if all else fails, and in the environment, the controls that we thought were doing exactly what it was supposed to be doing, no one poked a hole in the firewall accidentally, no one disabled the antivirus on a device, no one disabled MFA on the user object. If all else fails, we have an ability to say, we kind of know what happened, and hopefully we have some insight regarding catching the thing before it went from low risk to high risk. Right, so I point that out because this is obviously a different conversation in the journey when we're truly talking about adopting zero trust. It's not just implementing security controls for the sake of implementing. It's a very intentional focus on implementing security controls that help with these things that I'm kind of highlighting. As we get to the North Star, which is AI-powered security, this is where we're clicking on all cylinders. Right, we have stuff flying off, doing things for us, really helping us secure the environment. For anyone who's familiar with OpenAI, ChatGPT, we're already seeing the integrations of that to support environments where they don't have people to secure the environment, to be that co-pilot to help them secure the environment, right? And in some cases, people may not be coming in some of these environments, as evident by the cybersecurity skills gap. So what does this mean? We have to improve our human capital resilience as well. And that may mean in scenarios where increasing or incorporating in artificial intelligence into the environment. It comes with its own risk when it comes to AI, especially building your own AI. Hence why in previous slides we're showing some things where we're deploying things to secure AI, right? To help environments secure AI. It's probably a conversation no one's thinking about, because we're thinking about just how do we use AI. But going back to the digital transformation conversation, as you transform digitally, you have to modernize the security. So now we're already thinking about how do we secure AI models? How do we prevent AI poisoning? How do we make sure that responsible AI is available? How do we make sure that artificial intelligence doesn't go down? Right, these are things that are already coming to the surface. So next slide, and I think I have about 2 minutes?
Yes.
10 minutes? Alright, so I'll run through this. As we start talking about kind of where we are, right? I heard what happens if we're at zero. In my mind, it's not covering everything, but we find that a lot of customers don't realize if you are using M365 or Azure or Microsoft solution, we produce something referred to as a secure score. This provides you two things. One, a baseline of are you doing the minimum recommended security best practices for the environment? And then secondly, how much you compare with your peers. So, when it comes down to it, when we start to talk about email security, or identity security, data security, there are these metrics that show, okay, if you have these capabilities and you aren't turning stuff on, how do we recommend you turn more things on to improve the security posture? Obviously at a pace that you decide, but based on severity, right? So this is important as we're prioritizing what to do and when. And these security scores, we find that they have the background, no one knows they exist, but two things that should absolutely be paid attention to if we're looking at where are we today, and then what are those kind of next steps we should be taking with respect to hardening our environment, et cetera. So next slide.
You can use that to gain more funding, but what we're seeing in commercial enterprise account, this is a board level discussion now. You have CIOs and CISOs, it's compensation is now based on this.
And to further that point, for any school, if you happen to be in the room that has cyber insurance, because I cover that space a lot, cyber insurance policies are meant to reduce risk. You get higher premiums when it's detected that you have greater risk in the environment.
Exactly.
And how do they come to that narrative? They come to that narrative in one way, by this. They may ask you for this, or they come to it by giving you a survey that they ask for you to fill out that says, please attest to MFA being enabled for all users and admins. Please attest to having backups tested and secured. Please attest to having 24/7 security monitoring. Please attest to having phishing training for your users so that they don't get caught. Like, these questions that you have to attest to that, at which point, how you come out on the other end of that says what you pay and what you don't. So if we're thinking about the bottom line, right, how we protect more of those dollars that don't have to go to increased premiums means we do some of the basics and we improve that posture.
And right now, we, on all of our clients for Microsoft 365, we're focusing, I have my technical team, focusing on increasing all of their security scores. Because if it's below really 75%, it really hurts you in getting cyber insurance. They're not even looking at you anymore, because then you become at risk. So that's another thank you so much for that.
Yeah, it's not to say you won't get the insurance, but what could happen once again is the premium increase, or they include exclusions, right? Things that are not covered, and I'll call out the ransomware pieces. The reason why we saw what we saw in the past 2 years, the increase in cyber insurance premiums, is squarely because of ransomware. To the point where they broke out what's referred to as a supplemental application, meaning ransomware used to be included in core cyber insurance policy. They broke it out into a supplemental application to specifically ask you questions on that front, and now to determine whether or not they're going to cover you in the event of ransomware specifically. That's super important, because what happened to Lincoln is what we know, it was ransomware. So in a scenario where that's been taken out of your policy, right, you now have to ask yourself, are you going to have the coverage that you need because of that accident? So now let's get down to just a few things to wrap up with. So we released something referred to.
And I just want to say something real quick. You all, everyone will get a copy of the agenda. Everyone will get a copy of the presentation. You will also get a full recording of the event. You will also receive a template on the grant funding that Fortinet has put together. You will also get the security fabric roadmap, both that Microsoft and Fortinet have developed. We're getting a lot of inquiries on how can we get this content, where we're going to continue to get this information. So I just want to ensure that everybody, you will get everything you need, and we're already starting to set appointments. And also, and if you need us to come on site, I know we're gonna probably be at Morris Brown next week already, to just start getting them where they need to be. But just so you know, you will get everything you need. So I don't want you to feel like you're not gonna get any of this content, because we're getting a lot of inquiries, but you will get everything you need. And again, y'all, this is an ongoing series. I just feel like for the next 30 to 60 days, I want to do a one-on-one with our clients and our potential clients. And so we're coming to you, and as TJ just said, right now John is setting up a board meeting for me with the Morehouse School of Medicine to present to the board, because this is how serious this is getting, particularly in the areas of research and development. So
yeah, I mean, I can't. We go back to the highest risk conversation. It's obviously a different. No, you hit on a point, which is, since I work with a lot of academic medical centers, right? Oftentimes, depending on how they're integrated with the environment, there could be clear lines, there could not be. But the net is, for anyone following kind of the news, medical records are a high target. And oftentimes we're seeing the AMCs kind of be at a disadvantage because they may not be keeping up or maybe lagging farther behind the academic side of the institution. Now, in the news recently, for anyone who tracks cybersecurity events, LA Unified School District, a K-12 school district that got hit not too long ago. Just recently, they announced that all of the mental health and medical records for the students in the school system were released to the internet. Now, when you think about the ramifications of this type of data theft and then this type of data disclosure, this can impact students for the rest of their lives. We're not just talking about, school being down for a day or a week. We're talking about potential tax fraud. We're talking about potential identity theft. We're talking about potential displacement, meaning if there was information that disclosed that made them mentally, unstable in a sense because it could have been a pre-existing mental health challenge, right? This is extremely devastating, right? So the states are clearly obviously changing, but this notion on how we focus on the data that's important is so critical. As evident by as we start to talk about where we prioritize, right? I have that white box drawn out there on the right because every time we do something, we're thinking about highest risk. So this first item, right, we're thinking about validating trust for users and identities. Admins have to be in focus early. Who has the administrative credentials that can do all the harm? Can't allow them to fall to the bottom of the ecosystem. As we continue to roll out through that, we get into this security monitoring conversation, right? If we can't control it and we can't protect it in its fire, how do we make sure we're monitoring and we can reactively get to protect it, right? So this is all about security operations. As we get down to these later levels, right, this is kind of how can we get there, right? It's a North Star, we're moving towards it, but core security and attacking the core stuff that helps us get our zero trust journey started really jumps to the forefront of how do we make sure we get the critical stuff early and often. So next slide, last one, we'll bring it home. So there's a lot of things that can exist in your environment. This is the last two slides here. You can have software as a service, so if anyone's using ServiceNow, Salesforce, Microsoft 365, Workday, right? SaaS solutions, right? Probably exist. Public cloud infrastructure. You could be using AWS, GCP, Azure, doesn't really matter. You're using it. We can see a lot of customers, hey, we want to be multi-cloud, we want to use every cloud possible. Here's you have to understand. Every time you expand the digital footprint within the environment, it has to be secure. It has to potentially move into compliance value. So it's not just about saying, hey, how do we become the user of every technology possible within our environment? It's how do we be strategic about bringing in platform solutions and connecting dots to fill gaps in those platform solutions so that we can reduce the footprint and increase the security profile. Now with this, as the Fortinet team comes up here, this access policy conversation, this policy enforcement conversation really starts to infuse a lot of things, right? So as you think about how you're segregating your networks, doing micro-segmentation, bringing in firewall traffic, whatever, whatever else, the objective is we want to create centralization around where the data goes so that we can make decisions off of it, not operate in silos where we have some stuff telling us bad stuff is here, some stuff telling us bad stuff is there, and never talking, and then we get into a position where we're blind, right? That's a position that we don't want to be in. But across these use cases, IoT, corporate environment, managed users, non-managed users, BYOD, these are things that oftentimes roll into this type of architectural conversations. And if we play our cards right, we can create that arc over everything to make sure that we're nimble, right? So as the next thing comes, you now are just snapping to it and adapting, right? You're not refactoring, rebuilding everything, and you're kind of a bit more prepared, for evolution and for modernization within the digital space. This last slide here, as we transition over, I keep saying last slide. I forgot how many slides I had, but it was referred to as the NISA program, Microsoft Intelligence Security Association. What this is all about is intelligent information sharing. So you're building your architecture, right? How do we ensure that the architecture creates this information sharing ecosystem where the architecture can be intelligent? It's not a dumb architecture, right? So it's not one of those things where you may end up in an environment just only using Microsoft technology or just using some other vendor's technology. This is very much a solution conversation. Zero trust, as I mentioned, is not a technology. Anyone who tells you we can buy a product off of the, the marketplace and it's going to just give us zero trust, they're lying to you, right? Not trying to be very frank, but they're lying. So with that, we have to kind of take that into consideration. But when we're taking it into consideration, how do we go in with both eyes wide open and say, we want it to be intelligent, we want it to be integrated so that it can give us the outcomes that we want on both the user side of the house and the IT side of the house. Last slide should be Man, I know, how many times? So,
Yeah.
I'll hit it because it's super important to the last slide I'm gonna cover. Secure research is a big topic, right about
Yes.
across a number of higher education institutions. And I'm personally involved with a number of institutions that are actively going after funding so that they can tap into this funding stream. Some of which are focused on DoD and industrial-based research. Others are focused on research through the NSF. Others are focused on research through the NIH. So there's this huge ecosystem here. But a lot of schools are saying, okay, we have a small number of researchers. We currently don't roll research on the core IT stuff. They kind of do all their own stuff over on the side. How do we create a program and kind of what we might refer to as hydrated environments where when researchers come in and say, hey, I have this grant, I need to be able to do this, please spin it up for me and have it be secure but also compliant so that I can do the research that I'm going to do to be connected with researchers. So this notion of secure research enclaves kind of packaged templates to support these deployment motions where research environment needs to be spun up. The cloud has brought to the table the ability to do these things at hyperscale but also on demand and make it compliant and make it secure. So when we're talking about managing the bottom line, it could be the case that you don't need the research environment up all the time. Because maybe the research isn't happening all the time. But you need to be nimble or else the researchers are not going to come to you to provide the services that they're expecting you to provide. So as we think about this, these types of topics also infuse in the notion of zero trust in a sense that we're not just looking at it as one thing. We're looking at it as researchers may need artificial intelligence in that research enclave. They may need to use bots. They may need to use storage. They're going to need compute. They're going to have network infrastructure. So now we're looking at the bigger picture, and we're starting with secure by design to focus on zero trust when we're talking about these enclaves. So if it happens to be you, I'm going to go into more detail about that. Work with a lot of universities on this, but these topics relate. And this is where S4Net kind of comes into play as we think about how solution components come in here to play different roles, whether it's a firewall, whether it's compute, whether it's storage. This conversation extends to obviously the Microsoft Cloud, but also into non-Microsoft Cloud, because we're thinking about things like GCP. So with that being said, I will forego this last slide. We'll probably have to stick to it to just get to the next slide, but do a lot of work in the DoD. They just rolled out what they refer to as a zero trust capabilities matrix that we help them with and a roadmap that kind of lines it up step by step what they're doing. Not to say that you need to replicate the DoD, but here's what we know about CMMC. CMMC is all tied to protecting CUI data, controlled and classified information. It happens to be tied to DoD research. One can expect that the level of governance around that data will follow where the DoD goes. So I brought this up just to kind of illustrate that, but they are all in on zero trust, and this is what I look at. Not that everyone don't the same level of government, but I would argue that in higher education, the same quality information and data that exists in higher education exists in the DoD. Why? Because of all the research that happens, right? So the missile research that was done 3 years ago to help with our armed forces could have been at one of the universities that maybe exist here, or HBCUs that exist here. We don't know, but what we do know is that data now needs to kind of get protected in a different way. And as part of these grants and funds that are coming out, there's going to be guardrails that are looked at to say, hey, do you have the right controls in place? Can we trust you with that data? And can we now trust you, kind of infinitely because we know that data isn't just one thing that kind of pops up one day. Intellectual property can get stolen at any point in time and its lifetime. So thank you for having me here today. Hand it over to my Fortinet peers here and look forward to the conversation we have.